Thank you so much, EJ and Jane, and to Jess who can't be here. So we're just really excited to jump into this. So welcome everybody. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. I can't wait until we can all gather in some exciting space in person again. But this will do in the meantime. So thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I agree. Thank you. And I'm fairly new to this group. I'm not new to Katie. Katie and I have a long history together. So thank you for having us and to talk about this important topic.
So we're going to be talking, as EJ mentioned, about affirmative peer reviewing practices. So it's going to be grounded in Braidotti's idea of affirmative ethics. So this actually was a workshop that we put together for doctoral students and early career researchers. Tammy, did we do that over the summer?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah, time just kind of, it all melds together from the last year. So we're going to talk a little bit about where this came from and introduce ourselves a little more in a second. But first, we want to jump into an activity. So I've dropped the link to these slides in the chat. And so you can access all the documents we're going to be talking about through this slide deck. And you already have access to the folder that has the materials in it as well, but just for the ease of being able to get to places. So for the first activity, what I'm going to ask is for you to go to this link, click on the link, and go to Ship My Review Essay. Sorry, did someone have a question? I thought I heard something. Let me just drop it again for the folks who just came into the room. Okay, so you're going to go to Ship My Reviewer Say, and you can use your phone if you like, or you can click on the link, and then read down the page and choose a review tweet that affects you in some way. And then copy and paste the tweet into the chat. And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll chat a little bit and share. Okay, take one more minute. Okay. So take a look at the quotes that folks pulled out and put in the chat. And then one or two people, would you mind maybe sharing, why did you choose it? How did it affect you? Or what it made you think about?
Wow.
So Joe says it's the lack of constructiveness that bothers me so much. Yeah. Where do you go from here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of criticizing in terms of English, very sort of Anglo-centric. Any other comments or, yeah, it's rude for sure. Other comments or thoughts? It's hard for me to believe that anyone might write these things in a review, Alejandra. Um, I've received reviews, not quite as bad as a few of the things in here, but yeah. Yeah, what blind review makes possible. That's right. It becomes a cloak of anonymity so that you can put whatever you want. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So just to, just to wrap up this section, we're going to be talking about affect and what peer reviews can do. And so Tammy's going to talk a little more about affect, but affect's about change, right? And changing capacity. What does it turn you toward? What does it make possible? Or what does it shut down, right? So I'm going to hand it over to Tammy, who's going to, and now we're going to locate ourselves a little bit, and we're going to discuss a little bit about kind of where this comes from.
So Katie and I have a long history together. Actually, we were in a PhD program together where we started a self-study, using self-study to examine our own practices as educators, researchers, scholars, and we've always used a post-human new materialist perspective to do that. And that involved analyzing ourselves and our practices as part of connected multiplicities and mapping out our becoming widths and identifying smooth spaces and power flows. And we've published some pieces together where we have delved into kind of our interactions with systems and kind of this boundaryless kind of immanent perspective that we have. And we have a book that we co-edited where we looked at intimate scholarship and how we see ourselves as part of kind of everything around us. And we were asked to engage in writing this diffractive review of a book that will be coming out, Post-Human Knowledge, and of post-human knowledge and mapping the effective turn in education. And so what we did was actually we were writing the review of mapping the effective turn, and we had this great interesting affective experience where we got together during the summer of the pandemic, where we both were feeling so anxious ridden and depressed and filled with frustration and anger at the context of what was happening this summer in the United States with racial strife and the elections and the isolation and just climate change and all of it. And we found such collective joy in our reconnecting over reading and working together, and just this continuous affect that we decided to really write something different. And we were given permission to write this kind of different review about affect. And it really changed our kind of idea about what a review of a review could be. And so we've put a link to it here if you would like to see what that work kind of looked like. And we added links. So as we did this book review, we also took the opportunity to attend to our own affective becomings and how that happened in those spaces. And we created links throughout the review to kind of attend to what those affective becomings did and how those affective becomings fed back into our review of reading these two texts through and with each other. And that kind of led to this idea of affirmative reviewing of reviews. Katie, would you like to add to that?
I was just going to say, yeah, this actually itself was an affective scratch.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I just wanted to, I got so excited when you were talking because, you know, it just brings back the memories of us working that summer and producing this.
So I just want to go to. So we come from this point of view because we were so caught up in the affective point of this, we decided to think about affirmative ethics and how this notion of the pursuit of affirmative values in relations to enact collective political praxis of hope, compassion, and transformation was kind of threaded throughout our work from the beginning of all of what we have done together. But it wasn't what we were experiencing in other work that we were doing. And how could we bring that into other realms of work? And so we started to really delve into affirmative ethics, and we turned to Braidotty and her definition and how it involves the processing of pain and trauma by examining our current conditions and generating shared knowledge from them to forge new possibilities. And this really spoke to the current circumstances that we find ourselves, and that we didn't want to trivialize the current conditions and the pain and trauma that people are going through, but we also wanted to look for the possibilities of what was happening right now too, and to look for a way to engage and transform the toxic conditions and injustices of advanced capitalism. And so we turned to the idea of journals and reviewing as possible space for that transformation. And we really delved into affect, which is something that we have been teasing around a lot around the edges and have talked a lot about and have written about, but wanted to kind of slow down our own scholarship around and really engage with, and in relation to this notion of affirmative ethics. And so we came to this notion of affect as the thing that makes feelings feel. We love that. It's the relational forces that change us in some way. And I have to say that every time, and I mean every time in the past year, before Katie and I have any kind of Zoom meeting, because that's the only way that we can interact these days, I'm feeling like I don't want to have a Zoom meeting with anybody anymore. I'm out of any kind of anything I can offer. And we always remark at the end how we're so happy that we came together, because it changed us in some way, and we come away different. We have become different because of our interaction over whatever it is we were working on. And it increased our capacity to act. However, we don't want to gloss over the fact that affect can also diminish our capacity to act as well. And affirmative ethics does not ignore that capacity to diminish. It does not gloss over those negative affects. It directly engages and reworks with them to produce ways of becoming otherwise. And in the relational generation of new affective capacities, we can create adequate understandings. And so we would like to think about this in how this relates to academia. So Katie is going to address that.
Yes, thank you for that. So we were, working through our own understandings of affirmative ethics. And, one of the things that we talk about a lot is our neoliberal workspaces and just the constraints of, cognitive capitalism and larger academia, and how it affects us, and it closes off and shuts down and breaks us down. It's so toxic. And so we sort of talked about this idea of this competitive cutthroat model, that's really based on rejection. It's rejection culture, right? And we turned towards peer review because we were dealing with it at that time, which we'll talk about in a second, and talked about the fact that the critique that you get in peer reviews is often weaponized, right? It's not used in a way that helps you construct or build. And Joe pointed that out in the chat earlier, right? Often you get comments that are just used to belittle or to break down or to exclude, to tell you you're not good enough to be here. And so, these are some of the negative affects of peer review, right? So you're constantly rejected. You get this negative or judgmental critique of your work, and that's felt on your body, right? And then what does it produce, right? What are those affective productions? Low confidence, imposter syndrome, writing paralysis, and maybe even mental and physical health issues. And for some people, they leave the field. Tammy and I, one of our conversations one day revolved around a Twitter post of a guy who had said, from this review, I'm really thinking about leaving the field. I don't think I'm going to make it. I'm never going to get anything published. Maybe they're right. So we started thinking about that, right? How can we rework and transform these negative affects of peer review? I mean, even if it's just us, right, as a line of flight. So we started thinking about enacting an affirmative ethics through the peer reviewing process, right? So this idea that affirmative reviews can provide the same feedback in terms of content, right? But you do it in a way that's affirmative. So it's supportive and it's helping move towards, the next revision, helping to strengthen and build, right? To create a path for moving forward. So rather than tearing down, the review can use language and mobilize affect to point out where the productive aspects are, where the potentialities are, and then offer advice for strengthening, right? And so for us, we started to get the idea that, maybe this is a way that we can enact affirmative ethics to do academia differently in this instance. So this was sort of our entry point. So we were working on a special issue in professional development and education, and we actually have one of the authors that's going to be featured in the special, we have two authors who are going to be featured in the special issue. So E.J. Reynolds has authored a paper with several colleagues. And then Emily Lemieux, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and I apologize profusely if I'm not. So it's exciting. It's been a long process. So this came out of mapping our connections in academia, like where do we have some influence or some smooth space? So we landed on our special issue because often, you know, the conversations about things that you're working on, they all bleed together, right? And so we thought, okay, this could be a productive space for experimenting with the enactment of an affirmative ethics. So we have this double special issue we're working on. We have 30 manuscripts we have to review. All of them have one of probably 5 or 6 various nonlinear theories, but the majority of them are post-human, neo-materialist, Deleuzian, in that sort of category. And it's not easy to find folks in teacher education who are doing that work, you know, in that volume. We needed 60 reviewers. So what we did was we recruited a lot of advanced doctoral students and early career researchers, and then we offered this workshop. And so we said from the very beginning, right, either the first thing or one of the first things they're coming into contact with around reviewing is affirmative in terms of helping them do it. And often, you know, I didn't have any training or anything for providing reviews. You just kind of learn as you do it. So the other thing that we did was that we required all of our reviewers to conduct reviews from an affirmative stance, and I would say to varying degrees of success. We worked with reviews that came back, and so we did not include comments that were overly negative, and sometimes I actually rephrased some things. I didn't change any of the content, but just that, you know, we didn't want to include anything that was unnecessarily negative. So we did do that. And Jane, I really appreciated your comment before about how that's the editor's responsibility as well. So that was kind of our entry point. So I'm not going to go too far into this because, again, this was a workshop, you know, for early career folks, but I do provide it in case there's anyone here who would like a copy. So the elements of a review, it's a reviewing sheet that just lays out all of the different pieces. And this is for an empirical article, which the majority of our articles were empirical, working with original data. And so each of these sections, I have sets of questions that you go through, you know, for the introduction. You know, do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? You know, and looking at the quality and all of that. And so that's just sort of like the starting point. And then you take that and then you're doing this through an affirmative lens. And then, you know, I also let them know sometimes you'll also have specific questions to answer, but sometimes you'll just get a review and there won't be very much guidance. So that way this gives sort of a framework to start with in terms of what should I be looking at? What should I be helping with? Okay, Tammy, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. So Katie is going to put you in some groups, some breakout groups to read a review, an example of a review. And we'd like you to discuss some characteristics that you see from this review and what are the reviewer moves that you see? What are the turns that the reviewer makes in this review? And how do you think this might differ from a standard peer review or some of the things that you might have seen earlier in the Twitter feed? And if you were the author receiving this, how would you think it would make you feel? And what are the affective possibilities? So bringing this back to the notion of affect.
All right. So I have 4 general affirmative reviewing questions or prompts that I use when I'm doing a review. So the first is, what are the strong or compelling or most powerful aspects of the paper? And second, what parts of the paper affected you and how? How did you connect with the paper? Third, where are the ideas where you see potential? And what specific suggestions can you give for mobilizing it? And finally, what areas need strengthening? And what specific suggestions can you give for doing that? So let's take a look at putting these practices to work in an actual review that I conducted. So first, let's look at ways that we can use language to communicate the strengths of an article, the potential of an article, and the affects, or I should say a manuscript. It hasn't become an article yet. So in terms of strengths, here's an example. This article is well written and works creatively with nonlinear concepts. The vignettes will be especially helpful and accessible for practitioners. In terms of potential, This article offers a lot of promise in terms of approaching professional development from a complex, nonlinear stance, and then moving to help them move forward, right? So to build on this, authors need to more clearly state the argument the article makes, as well as the rationale for the study. And then this final one communicates potential as well as affects. In the article, authors hint that the policy and the frameworks themselves are agentic actors in the coaching assemblages. I found myself fascinated by this idea. Consider bringing this out a little more in your discussion. And so, really one of the keys here is using strengths-based and future-oriented language. So for example, the author's use of the ideas of mapping and tracing as applied to coaching and professional development is novel and offers a lot of potential for producing a complex analysis. These are the ways that the analysis might be strengthened to provide a more complex portrait of coaching, right? So I'm going to provide some really explicit examples of the way that they might strengthen this piece. So I'm asking them to connect the concepts of mapping and tracing a bit more tightly to the examples of practice, right? And I pose a question: is the argument that the vignettes are maps and they demonstrate the hybridity that occurs from translating ideas into practice? Make that more clear. The idea of untangling coaching vignettes and reweaving into vibrant hybridity with a rhizomatic perspective is excellent. But the vignettes as written need more detail to be able to do this and demonstrate the hybridization that's occurring. The authors state that the hybridization happened, but we need more thick description that shows this and provides evidence for this. So I'm giving very specific suggestions for moving forward. And so continuing with that theme of being very specific and giving real concrete suggestions. The authors do an excellent job discussing the theoretical concepts and engaging with the professional development literature at the beginning of the paper. In sections where you're critiquing linear thought and discussing alternative nonlinear perspectives regarding teacher learning, make sure that you cite not only theoretical works, but also point to the empirical teacher education studies who employ nonlinear approaches to teacher learning, development, and/or practice. Some possible works you may want to consider include Colmenares and Morvay, Mills, Strom, so and so, right? So I'm giving some I'm also giving them some references to go to, some example references. So this is really an example of and reviewing, right? So it's not just that we're giving positive reviews, right? We can provide reviews that are affirmative and strengths-based and rigorous and help the author improve and. So this is really a reframing from reviewing as critiquing or closing down to providing support to expand and build or opening up, right? So this goes back to the idea of affirmative ethics. We are reworking the idea of reviewing and the negative affects that it tends to produce in terms of closing down, and instead moving to more of a mentoring approach. So it's still going to be rigorous. It's still going to be providing suggestions for improvement, but it's all about helping the author move forward. So it's a fundamentally supportive relational stance. So in terms of an actual process for conducting an affirmative review, here's what I do. So I read the manuscript and I make notes, not just about areas of improvement, but also the areas of strength, the areas that affect me in some way, areas that have promise and can be built on, and the areas that need to be strengthened. And then if there are questions provided by the journal, use those or use the reviewer checklist that's been provided from this session, and then compile your notes for each question or category. At this point, because we're very well conditioned, especially if you've been conducting peer reviews for a while, to focus on the areas for improvement. And so go back over and make sure you've also captured the strengths and areas of potential and areas where you were affected, right? Make sure that the comments are balanced, that they're affirmative, they're supportive, and they're rigorous. And then finally, examine each area where you've mentioned a need, either where there's some potential or there's a specific need for strengthening, and make sure that your language is very concrete it's specific, it's constructive, right? And it's got those specific concrete suggestions so that you're helping the author map out a path for moving forward, hopefully towards publication. Okay, so in small groups, we're going to talk about, one of the following questions, or create your own. But, what were you thinking or feeling during the workshop? What do you think the affordances and challenges of affirmative reviewing might be? What are your thoughts on enacting affirmative ethics in academia? And what might be some of the productive spaces where you could enact affirmative ethics in your own context? Okay. So thank you so much. And if you have questions for us, or if you just want to connect, please feel free to email us. Our addresses are here, and we would love to hear from you, and always want to connect with other scholars in this area.